All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending the July 8th, 2025 Active Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. Just want to welcome everyone. For folks in the office, if you didn't sign in, please sign in, and there's agendas available. There's also water and coffee available over on the right side of our entry area if you're so interested at any point. For folks online, like I mentioned, if you could type your name, title, and affiliation into the chat, we will read those out momentarily. Hybrid meeting guidelines. If you could please mute your microphone when you are not speaking, including when you first join the meeting, that would be great. You can choose to use just the phone function if you want to call in. You can choose to have your camera on or off if you'd like. At this time, I'm the only one who can see the camera since we are sharing a screen. You can use the chat function or raise your hand if you have a question at any point during the meeting. We'll read those questions out when we get to a good breaking point. This meeting is being recorded and is also being live streamed to the Transportation Council's Zoom page. So we can go around the room right now and do some quick introductions. I'm Ethan Townsend, Transportation Planner with Capital Region Transportation Council. I run the Active Transportation and Freight Transportation programs. Over here, Valerie.
I'm Valerie Dean from New York State Department of Transportation, Region 1 out of Albany.
John Scavo with the town of Clifton Park.
Sandy Miswitz, the Executive Director of the Transportation Council.
Parker Morris, Transportation Council, Transportation Planner.
Linda Vonderheide, Principal Planner in Rensselaer County.
Great. And then online, we have Matthew Rowe from Stantec, Emily Laughlin from CDTA, Tom Houlihan from City of Rensselaer, Nate Owens, Town of Bethlehem, Christina Aki from New York State Department of Health, James Rath with Capital Streets, Ed Brennan, the Albany Bicycle Coalition, Adam McCarville with the Transportation Council, Ben Luke with the Albany County Department of Health, Chris Alfonso with the New York State Department of Health, Leah Foster from Voorheesville, Scott Miller from Saratoga Plan, and Leah Rye from the Transportation Council. Now we will go over the agenda real quick. We have a couple presentations today. So we'll start off with our feature presentation, which will be a presentation on the 2025 NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide from Matthew Rowe, Stantec, formerly with NACTO, so he's very familiar with the contents of that guide. We'll then have an update on the Transportation Council's Voorheesville Safe Streets Linkage Program that is coming to an end. So we'll be hearing the recommendations, I believe, from that study today. We'll then go into our discussion items, which will include the 2025 to 2030 TIP, which has been adopted, just reviewing the active transportation related projects that were selected for funding. We'll update you on the current status of our long range plan update, the In Motion 2050 plan. Give a quick shout out to our trail count program for this year, which is getting going, and we are currently soliciting requests for, and then go over the status of our planning initiatives here at the Transportation Council. Then we'll hear any updates from participants, both in person and online, that wants to share anything. A couple other updates, and then review our upcoming meetings, or meeting singular, remaining in 2025. So with that, we will turn it over to Matthew Rowe. Let me stop sharing my screen, and then Matthew, you should be able to share yours.
Thanks. Sure. Great. You should be starting to, good. You should see my Urban Bikeway Design Guide overview screen now. You see that?
Not seeing it on our end.
Not quite. Okay. Just a moment. Screen application. Good. You should see it now. Okay.
Looks like it's working. Yep, there we go. We can see it on our end.
Great. And let me know when it changes. The page changes.
Page changed. Looks like we're
Great.
good to go.
Okay, we're snappy here. My name's Matthew Rowe. I was the technical lead at NACTO. I was at NACTO for about a decade. And before that, I was at the New York City Department of Transportation when a lot of the first protected bike lanes and interim design pedestrian safety infrastructure and Times Square, Herald Square project were all being built. So I've got this kind of overview of that, and for my time at NACDO, from working with a lot of cities on their bikeway projects and beyond. And I was a co-author of the Urban Bikeway Design Guide. So of this third edition of the Urban Bikeway Design Guide. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I will say I know some of you are probably familiar with the earlier editions and maybe even this edition of the Urban Bikeway Design Guide. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what's different and changed and updated and what's brand new, and talk about the guide itself. So at its core, it's design guidance, and it's about safety, it's about access, it's about equity, it's about getting people where they're going safely by 2 and 3 wheels. So what you can do, this is probably the most important thing I can actually tell you, is that if you're a city or another local jurisdiction, a county, a town, you can actually, a village, you can actually adopt the NACDO design guidance, whether it's the Urban Bikeway Design Guide or the Urban Street Design Guide, and you can actually use federal funding on city-owned streets, right? If it's, or locally owned streets, I should say. If it's direct funding to you, or even if it's pass-through funding through New York State DOT, you can use the NACDO guidance as the standard of record for federally funded projects. That's part of the IIJA or bill, as it was also called. And on the NACDO website, there's guidance on how to adopt a design guide. You can also adopt FHWA's own guidance. So believe it or not, FHWA's published guidance, like the Rural Multimodal Networks Guide, the Rural and Small Town Multimodal Networks Guide, which is a great guide, and which we drew from. Believe it or not, that's not automatically used on FHWA funding sources. You have to actually adopt it if you're going to use it locally. So with that said, what's new, what's updated? So we updated almost all of the protected bike lane and bike boulevard and what we called constrained bike lanes, so marked conventional 5 or 6 foot bike lanes. We updated how traffic signals are dealt with. We updated the wayfinding section, so everything in green here. And the design tools section is, you'll see it's actually quite long. So that's a bunch of more detailed drawings of small features like refuge islands or neighborhood traffic circles, things like that you might be implementing on any kind of bike street, whether it's a bike boulevard or a marked bike lane or some other type of street. We also updated how you manage vehicle speed and volume. So there was another publication between the second and third editions called the Designing Bikeways for All Ages and Abilities. So that was part of the inspiration for this guide. And there's another publication called Don't Give Up at the Intersection, and we adapted a lot of the material from that and updated it so that we've got really a very robust intersection guidance chapter. It's a large portion of the book. See, it's over 100 pages. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the and everything else, by the way, is new material. Transit stops, curbside activity, which includes accessible boarding and accessible loading and parking, and a lot of material about planning a bike network. Okay, as well as maintenance. So here, let's see if I can. There we go. I'll go back to this one to do this. Just a moment, please, while my computer catches up to me. Okay. Looks like Acrobat has crashed of all things. So I will talk for a minute while I reload. The Bikeway Design Guide draws from real world examples, and one of the things that really sets it apart is that it's is that it deals with real city um, uh, real city implementations, and has we've done the research based on what actually worked in those cities. So there are these peer networks that were set up to actually exchange information about how well protected bike lanes had worked and how well the markings that were used for buffered bike lanes had worked. So there's been a lot of research that went into this, and I think that that's key to understanding its value to cities. Okay, let's see if this works now. Nope, you're still seeing the same thing. We're going to try this a slightly different way. Please bear with me.
Take your time.
Yeah. I can take questions while I load it on a different program. This is my I hereby endorse Bluebeam rather than Adobe.
Matthew, I have a question maybe you could answer while we're doing that.
Mhm.
I haven't spent a lot of time with the new version, but I've spent a lot of time with using the older versions. And one thing that I think would be helpful to hear your perspective on is, I think the NACDO guide has a ton of information for big cities that are trying to become like as bike friendly as possible, or as good of a place for biking as possible. Can you talk a little bit about how smaller cities, like here in the capital region, how we can use the guide most effectively?
Sure. Yeah. So there's really two answers to that. One is to adopt it because you can adopt it no matter what size jurisdiction you are. Here we go. This should work now. Once I reshare, the other, and that will give you the leverage to use federal funding, and I would hope that NISDOT would also honor that for state funding sources. The other thing that is really essential to remember is that we all have, in all of our cities in the capital region and all of our villages and towns, we have some urban development, right? We have this, we often have an urban core, even if it's very small, even if it's only a few blocks long. And we might have a whole lot of what we call suburban, but is very much a developed place. People live there, people work there, people shop there, people walk there and bike there. And we have a lot of material here that works on the kind of low volume and low speed street. I say we, I'm still talking like NACDO, but there's a lot of material in the guide that works on those low volume, lower speed streets, and that are really tailor made for what I'll broadly call the residential context. And that's important because that's the vast majority of the network. So when you're trying to get people from place to place within a larger network, you're often getting them on these smaller streets rather than on the kind of big streets. You can probably see chapter 1 right now, right? So while some of your streets are going to look like this, especially in the busiest parts of a downtown core, even if it's the center of a village, or if it's the redeveloped part of a major suburban arterial street. there's still going to be a lot of network that doesn't look like this. And the guide takes pains to actually deal with all of these route types, including neighborhood routes, and kind of figuring out where are those barriers to biking. Where is it really difficult to cross a major street? Where are there types of infrastructure, like maybe there's a bridge that goes over a highway, but that isn't as suitable right now for biking, and is really only designed for motor vehicles. So what are those kinds of barriers that we can start to address? And then the last part of that answer is going to be at the very end of this presentation, which is shared use paths, and in general off-street paths, which we didn't cover in the second edition, but we do cover in this edition. I'm going to skip kind of some of the more procedural stuff, but there is a lot of material about how to expand your organizational capacity, what kind of work has to be done. In bigger cities, some of this work takes longer. Smaller cities, villages, towns often have an easier time adopting supportive policies like a complete streets policy or adopting an active guidance, and coming to a shared understanding. A lot of you have kind of that muscle already. And for a lot of bigger cities is actually the first time that they've had to address some of these fundamental value issues of what they want on their streets. So I hope that answers that a little bit, James.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Can everyone see Chapter 3, Design Bikeways for All Ages and Abilities now?
Yep.
Great. So, there's an idea here that there's going to be growth in biking. I don't have to talk to this group about the difference between a confident rider and a less confident rider, or someone who will ride only if there's really good infrastructure. The vast majority of us will ride if there's really good infrastructure, won't ride if there isn't. And some of us fall somewhere in between. So, while a lot of the historic infrastructure has been kind of designed for the person on the left, either it's wide lanes or shared lanes on major streets, or it's recreational paths, the growth in biking is really the person on the right, right? That's where we have the growth potential. And we see a lot of utility biking in the capital region. And I think that's an important part of how we think about this, is that we are still, we have a lot of potential for growth. We already have a lot of people who bike for transportation. And that's who we're ultimately serving with the facilities in this guide. So all the way on the left side, we've got low speed, low volume streets. And then as we go through the guide, we get to higher and higher speed streets. So we start with bike boulevards and advisory bike lanes, which are a type that, that do have a lot of potential, I think, in the streets of the capital region. And then into protected bike lanes, which have, again, a lot of potential here on streets that have excess capacity. A typical 4-to-3 lane conversion can often accommodate them. But then as we get into bikeways that require more investment, we get a lot more bang for the buck. Put that a different way. As we go to bikeways that require a lot more investment, we can capture even more of that market share of transportation users. So raised bikeways and off-street paths. There's detailed guidance on some of the crucial issues like bikeways at bus stops that we know are often kind of the sticking point for bikeways, and things like pro-ag friendly loading zones. And there's detailed guidance on non-visual wayfinding and detectable surfaces. This is a evolving area, including things like that very last item, which I'll zoom in on. There are new materials that are shaped such that you can detect them with a cane, but you can also bike over them safely. That can serve as separation. there's a lot about designing bikeable intersections, like this example from Austin, where a lot of that, again, a lot of that land use context is more similar to what we see in the broader capital district than what you might see in Boston or something like that. The idea here is that if we can provide distinct paths of travel through an intersection and slow down the turns or separate the turns if we can't slow them down or if they're too high volume, then we can actually create intersections that work for everybody rather than intersections that are barriers, as they too often are today. So we're often, as a project designer and planner, I know that too often we develop a great cross section and then we get to the intersection and we just can't figure it out. So this guide should help with that. It often involves trade-offs, but this is kind of the, when you have a lot of room, especially when there's an existing parking lane, you can create protected intersection geometry. And if the turn volume is relatively low, this works really well and you have that room. Now, you might say, well, but that never happens, but it does happen. A lot of urban streets, a lot of larger urban streets that might have been originally designed to be the key route, but are now kind of supplanted by a parallel highway, really do have this kind of room. At busier intersections, use that signal separation to help people actually walk, bike, roll through the intersection separately from turns. This example is from Montreal, but there's a wide variety of US examples and MUGCD compliant examples and guidance about when you should probably go beyond the MUGCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. There's detailed guidance on how many turns are too many turns. I'm not going to dwell on this, but there's a lot of signal guidance in here because we heard from people who use the guide, oh, well, this is great, but we need something besides just a fully protected signal. We need to be able to give people a leading bike interval, which is also a leading pedestrian interval. We need to give people, we need some knowledge about, well, when is it okay to have a green ball cars and a parallel walk and to let bikes go through at the same time. So that's what this is all about. And fundamentally, it's about making sure that when those drivers turn, they can actually see the bikeway. There's also a great chat, and I'll finish up in just a moment. There's also a chapter on how to keep bikeways working even in the severest of conditions. And we certainly have those conditions here. So learning from how Toronto, Montreal, Boston, and other very snowy cities, and Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, and other very snowy cities have done it. There's detailed material about how kind of the design of the bikeway influences what vehicles you can get down it, how those two have to some extent, be a two-way street, pun intended, where you are making decisions about what kind of maintenance vehicles you're using, both for sweeping and for snow clearance, and also what widths, what clear widths you're using. So often that's a constraint, and you say, oh, well, we can't do a protected bike lane because we need to sweep or we need to plow. That's a choice. It can be expensive to transition. It can be time consuming to transition, but that's an important decision that we as jurisdictions may have to make if we're going to get to a protected bikeway network. And sometimes we're going to decide, no, it's not worth it to do that. Sometimes we're going to decide, well, we need to do a buffered bike lane, or we need to do a buffered bike lane now and build toward a shared use path later. And those are the kinds of decisions that this chapter guides you through. Okay, so that's that for the guide. And I believe that this webinar code is still working, but that's I can check on that. But nacto.org/bike guide or islandpress.com. Okay, I'm going to let you write that down, and I'm going to take questions for 5 minutes or so.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Does anyone in person or online have any questions for Matthew? I have one, but I'll hold it for the end if anyone has any other questions.
Get my video working again. Kyle.
Hi, thanks, Matthew. I'm wondering if you can expand on the process of adopting these guidelines, as well as that Federal Highways Rural and Multimodal Network Design guideline that you're speaking about. Is it,
Yeah.
if your municipality has not adopted these guidelines, are you still able to use federal funding to build facilities in the way that they're recommended in these NACDO or FHWA guidelines, or is that adoption process necessary before you can use federal funds for those types of designs?
Anyone from NISDOT on here? Yes, there are some folks from New York State DOT, right? I will say this, it's basically if NISDOT is okay with it, you don't need to adopt them, right? So if it's a type of infrastructure that's covered in any NISDOT guidance or standard, no, you don't need to adopt the NACDO guidance. If it's not covered, then it is recommended to adopt it, and that should, under IIJA, the locally adopted guidance on a locally owned street does override state guidance or state standards. So if it's something like a flashing yellow arrow across a bikeway that might or might not be covered, NISDOT might or might not have anything that covers that, or if it's a protected intersection design, state might or might not have anything that covers that. So you may need the NACDO guidance for that. I see a question in the chat from Ed. Locally, we've greatly increased the number of traffic circles. The guidance changed, make them safer. Yeah, there's a whole section on roundabouts, and I'll say traffic circles and roundabouts, two separate ways. Mini traffic circles, small neighborhood traffic circles are a traffic calming device. You mostly see them where a small local street or maybe a collector type street meets another local street. Those are mixed traffic. They are very low speed inherently, and it's good to use them in a network. And Seattle and Portland have had a lot of success using them on the right boulevards. Those are the small ones where it's intentionally really hard to drive straight. You have to drive very slowly around them. Roundabouts, which we have tons of now in the capital region, yeah, there's extensive guidance on two forms of roundabouts in the NACDO guidance. One is where the bikeway is fully separated from the sidewalk that goes around the roundabout, and the other is when there's shared use path, and there's guidance for how to get people up onto the shared use path, or if the intersection streets don't have bikeways, how to merge them into a protected bike lane that goes around. But yeah, it's a major concern, but the simplest answer is to use the same principle of a protected intersection to provide space, as much space as you can, for visibility between the turning drivers and the bikes that are crossing. So thanks for that question. Did I see a low traffic road? Sorry. Did I see a low traffic road with safe areas on both sides and one lane of traffic between it? Yes. You saw an advisory bike lane, which is also known as a yield street, but it's essentially you take a street that's just a little bit wider than a typical, well, I should say it's wide enough currently for one car to go in each direction. But instead they call them advisory shoulder roads. That's right. Thanks, Kyle. FHWA, the FHWA rural and small town multimodal design guide has them. The idea is that a driver can be going in the center in one direction. Bikes can be going in either direction in the designated advisory bike lanes. And then if there's an oncoming driver, the drivers have to yield to each other, right? They have to wait for bikes to pass. Then they can actually go into the bike lane. It's advisory. They're allowed to go into it in order to pass one another. So it's for low volume, low speed roads. And the NACDO guidance recommends installing speed humps or some other traffic calming device on those streets to keep those speeds down so that the drivers are more likely to actually slow down, yield to bikes as an oncoming driver's coming. I don't see anything else in the chat. Oh, I should mention everything is online. This whole the whole guide is online now, so you can get the hard copy version for purchase, or you can get the online version. You can get all the material for free. It's just in a different format. Here's the design guide. Here's a link to, and I can take another question while we. Here, I'll actually show the advisory bike lanes. Here are advisory bike lanes. NACTO provides a few options at intersections. You can either fully separate them, and this is a very robust separation, or you can mix them into the lane. But in either case, you're doing something a little bit different at the intersection than you are mid-block.
Neat. Thank you very much. Matthew, you said the online resources are totally free for people to access?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. And
And
I'll, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say, if anyone has questions about these, about the design guide, since you're no longer with NACTO, would it be better for them to reach out to you, or do you have a recommendation for someone at NACTO they can reach out to with questions?
You can definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to answer anything that that's about the content of the guide. If it's about adopting the guide, I do recommend reaching out to either I'll say Carrie at nacto.org or Josh at nacto.org. Josh, either Carrie Barron or Josh Narramore. Carrie is in charge of biking stuff at NACTO, anything with biking micromobility, so anything with two wheels. And Josh is in charge of policy there and can help you out with anything that's more nuanced than what I could explain about design guidance adoption.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Matthew. We really appreciate you taking the time to present on the design guide today.
Thanks, everybody. Happy trails.
Thanks. All right, folks, give me one moment here. Share my screen again. So next up, we have got an update on the Village of Voorheesville Safe Streets Plan and Policy. Me make Kyle co-host here, so he'll be able to share his screen. This is a linkage program study that is currently being, the consultant is EDR, Environmental Design and Research. Kyle Hatch is the main person with EDR leading this project. So now I will again stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Kyle to give us a little update on this project. Whoa. Come on, Zoom.
Can everybody see the presentation on my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So I know I don't have a ton of time and I can tend to be long-winded, so I will try to get through this quickly. This is the Voorheesville Safe Streets Policy and Plan. This is basically a complete streets plan, which I'm sure folks on this call are very familiar with. So I'll try to breeze through most of the things that are pretty standard to complete streets policies and plans, and maybe we'll focus a little bit more on the aspects that are unique to this specific study. Just for some background information, this is the project scope. On the right here, you have a map of the Village of Voorheesville. These green highlighted streets are priority streets or focus streets that basically these are state and county owned roads where we focus the majority of our attention for the purposes of this study. In terms of scope, we're down here at the final task, working through final submissions. We just gave a presentation on this to the Village Board of Trustees. We'll be giving this presentation here, making some final revisions to the plan, putting it out for public comment, and then wrapping everything up at the end. Again, just a little bit more background information to help set the stage. We established a project vision and goals very early on. I don't think the group here needs to read through the project vision, but the goals are pretty important just for the context of everything else I'm going to be presenting on the policy and recommendations. So the goals of this study were to identify transportation safety issues and specifically account for the comfort of vulnerable road users. So I think that's important because we were also looking at perceptions of safety, not just actual safety based on crash figures. We wanted to look for specific interventions on priority streets. Those were those green highlighted streets I just showed on the map above. And then develop a complete streets policy and plan that would guide future decisions for the village. We did some pretty robust community engagement and a detailed existing conditions report. These are the key findings. Again, this is background information just to give you you all some information on where we were coming from as we developed our recommendations and policy. So in terms of demographics, it's a very family-oriented community. There are a lot more children in the village than we found when you compare it to the town of New Scotland, where the village resides, or Albany County overall. About 1 in 10 residents have some kind of a disability that impacts their ability to get around. Looking at land use and zoning, most destinations are concentrated within the village's historic center. It's an old railroad town, so most things are based near the old railroad centers. And the village has recently updated zoning to encourage more mixed-use development in those existing commercial destinations. So we're not looking at any sprawling destinations appearing on the outskirts of the village based on their zoning. They're trying to concentrate everything where there's already activity. For the transportation system, the state and the county own the most heavily trafficked roads, and those are also where the commercial corridors are, so the village has limited control over those roadways. The village is also the end of the Albany County Rail Trail, which creates a unique opportunity for recreation and active transportation. Really, their Main Street corridor could thrive off of the traffic that comes in from this rail trail. Looking at the traffic or crashes and safety, we looked at vulnerable road users and found that every crash in the village that involved a vulnerable road user resulted in injury, and the number of those crashes was trending in the wrong direction. More vulnerable road users were being hit the later the data was, or the more recent the data was. Most of those crashes are concentrated on the state and the county owned roads. And then this was kind of a unique piece. It's a railroad village, so there are railroad tracks and railroad bridges. One of these bridges is a CSX bridge over New York State 85A with low clearance. Just be very blunt about it. The signage warning truck drivers about the low bridge is pretty terrible. A lot of times truck drivers don't know that there's a low bridge coming up because of the signage until it's too late and there's not a good turnaround location. So that created a lot of, we heard about it frequently when we talked to village staff and residents that trucks would either hit the bridge or get stuck and need a sheriff's escort to back up the road and turn around. And then general community feedback. This was from our survey and community meetings. More than 85% of the residents said that they wanted more infrastructure for non-vehicular travel. So really strong local support for better bike and pedestrian infrastructure, better transit infrastructure. And the primary concerns that people had were with speeding, safety for the children, drivers not complying with pedestrian crossings, and limited availability of infrastructure. I'll skip over this really quickly. Basically, we just used well-established guidelines for developing our Complete Streets policy from Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition. We also referenced NYBC's Complete Streets training just for some New York State specific guidance. I'm not covering the entire policy here because it's a lot of text. These are just kind of a summary of all the policy clauses that are in here. Again, this is based off of the guidance from Smart Growth America, so people should be pretty familiar with these. Basically, we have a clause that reiterates the community vision. After that, we state the policy intent, which is to ensure that all roads adhere to design standards that promote safety and usability for everybody. We define the users that are being planned for, so that includes bicycles, pedestrians, micromobility devices, and then we had some special considerations for children, the elderly, people with disabilities. We talked about project phasing, which says that the policy is relevant to every aspect of a project from visioning all the way through construction. We clarified when exemptions are possible, and if an exemption is made, what the village board of trustees should do to keep transparency and explain to residents why a project was exempt from the policy. We have a commitment to an integrated network, which basically says that the village will accommodate users across all of its network. But basically, an example of this is like if a sidewalk ends, then the village has to provide some kind of a safe place for pedestrians to get around on the road where the sidewalk ends. We established design standards. This is actually what we were just talking about. This is basically a big list of design guidelines that the village can reference for designs within the village. So we have CRTC's Capital District Design Guidelines. We also reference several NACDO design guidelines, the Federal Highway Administration, rural and multimodal network designs that Matthew was just talking about. All of those are listed in there. We have a clause for context sensitivity that basically says things will be designed in accordance with the local aesthetic, some performance measures to track how the village is doing in implementing the Complete Streets policy, and then a series of implementation mandates that says how the village is going to prepare itself to do this. So like assigning a responsible entity, in this case, it's the village planning board that is responsible for overseeing the policy. The planning board can assign a liaison if they would like assistance with that, or create a Complete Streets advisory board. Though with the capacity of a small village like Voorheesville, it was decided that the planning board is likely going to take on all the responsibilities. One unique thing that's in here, I think folks here might find interesting, is we did explicitly note that the village can use tactical urbanism and temporary infrastructure projects. Part of this is just, I personally am a fan of doing things this way, trialing them, but we also heard from village staff that their DPW superintendent is very gung-ho. And when you tell him to do something, he wants to be out there the next day trying to do it. And so this was kind of a way for us to give him the freedom to start making some immediate changes without necessarily doing this in permanent infrastructure, where he might, bypass permitting processes and things like that. So it gives him a little bit of flexibility in trying out interventions on local roads and seeing how that works out for him. This is where we started to get into some new things. So I created these, we're calling them supplemental design principles. This is just, from my experience, seeing where things might slip through the cracks on traditional Complete Streets policy. So we kind of broke it out into two sections. There's this first one here we're calling Universal Principles to Promote Safety, Accessibility, and Comfort. Really, this is three main things that we're pushing for here. This clause defines pedestrian travel speeds. We've seen that under MUTCD, there's a good amount of flexibility. I believe they say anywhere from 2.5 feet per second up to 4 feet per second is an allowable pedestrian travel speed, and that will impact things like light timings, and if somebody pushes an RRFB, how long those lights are flashing to let a pedestrian cross the street. We basically are saying that the village is setting the standard speed for the speed that MUTCD says an elderly person may travel at, because we specifically called out that population of the policy. We want to make sure that engineers are designing crossings for the speed those people will be traveling. We have another clause in here that is really pushing for limiting curb cuts and maintaining consistent sidewalk elevations. The village has a few roads where there are a lot of private driveways on historic homes, and what we saw is brand new installed sidewalks. We're basically doing like a lot of up and down over these private driveways. So on a 1/4 mile stretch, a person might be going up to sidewalk level and down to driveway level 13 or 14 times along a block. And so what we're recommending is that that becomes limited as much as possible, as well as access management for commercial destinations, trying to have one driveway access point in and out, just to reduce the number of times a person with a mobility impairment might have to navigate that small hill. And then reducing the village-wide speed limit down to 25. This is probably a pretty standard practice at this point, but we wanted to explicitly call it out in this policy. After that, we had some additional clauses to promote connectivity and an integrated network. If anyone's familiar with Voorheesville, it is has been developing pretty rapidly for a while. Lots of suburban cul-de-sac subdivisions, that kind of thing. Basically, what we're doing here is saying, as developers are building those subdivisions, if they're within a certain distance of existing infrastructure, they need to provide a safe connection to the existing infrastructure. And they also need to look at the potential for connections to other existing developments adjacent to them. The idea behind this is to make sure if a new development comes in, the developer's doing things like getting a crosswalk installed to get the new residents to an existing sidewalk. And they're also looking at opportunities for footpaths over to other cul-de-sacs and things like that. So we didn't want dead-end streets for bicyclists and pedestrians. You can use a cul-de-sac to dead-end a street for a car. But in future development, bicyclists and pedestrians should have a path to go through to basically give them a grid for the shortest path to get through places. That covers the majority of the policy. How this policy is applied also comes down to this aspect of assigning road typologies. This is something that CRTC does on a lot of their funded complete streets plans. I really like it a lot. It makes the process pretty clear. It basically requires you to identify the purpose of each street in a community and then the appropriate design for the street based on that purpose by classifying them as typologies. So we broke out the village of Voorheesville into 3. We have local residential streets. That's everything you see blue here on the map. You can see here's a lot of those suburban subdivisions with cul-de-sacs and dead-end roads. This typology is basically village-owned roads that are primarily residential in use, don't have a lot of traffic volume. After that, we designated main streets and commercial corridors. This is literally the village main street, and it is actually called Main Street. This is where all of the historic mixed-use development is really taking place in the village. These are county-owned roads, so the land use here is mixed or commercial. The lot sizes are typically small, things are walkable. Traffic counts are a little bit higher than the residential streets, but still nothing very, very high. And then after that is regional connectors. These are primarily the state-owned roads. There's a mix of commercial, residential, and some mixed-use development. The lots are typically much larger and spread out, though. If you find a commercial lot, this is like your traditional strip mall or big box type of development with a massive parking lot in front, primarily designed for cars. The traffic volumes on these streets are much higher than what you would find in the rest of the village, and they also carry a considerable amount of freight. With the road typologies, this is by no means a comprehensive list. We came up with a list of complete streets design elements that might be installed for each one. Typically, the way that I've seen these done is you would get a big table like this, and if a design element is appropriate for a certain typology, you just get an X or a bullet point in the table. When I see that, usually I see a table that's just full of a lot of X's or bullet points, and it doesn't really tell you what the priority design elements should be for a certain street. So we tried to add, I would call them tiers, 3 tiers of importance or priority to these design elements. We have mandatory, which is pretty much as close as we could get to legally requiring elements to be installed. We didn't do the full legal requirement because the village doesn't own several streets. So, these mandatory design elements are basically the things that we're encouraging the village to push very hard to make sure they get. After that, we have preferred design elements. Those may be excluded depending on the context. And then we also have context sensitive elements, which are usually not going to be appropriate, but given certain situations, we're telling the village to look at the viability of some of these things. So for example, a curb extension or a bump out, most of the time the village streets don't have existing sidewalk networks. And so those things might not be appropriate in like a cul-de-sac subdivision, but there are some developments where there's a little bit more traffic. The subdivision is right up against the main road. And so maybe those curb extensions or bump outs are appropriate in those specific locations. Moving on from that, we developed 3 conceptual designs for priority areas within the village. These were locations that we heard a lot from the community about needing some kind of improvement. So this first area here that we're looking at is a mid-block crossing, New York State 85A. It's basically just this crosswalk. It connects to a village park here. You can see because of the nature of this turn and the location of this house, this is a blind crossing. So a lot of residents talk to us about perceptions of safety here. And our solution is obviously we can't like move this house or fix things, but really everything we can to slow down traffic and make the crossing as visible as possible. So we increased the width of the sidewalk in a couple places, made the lanes more narrow, specifically on this southern lane here. We got rid of the shoulder and bumped the sidewalk out all the way up to the travel lane. We're proposing a raised crossing here. It's going to be very difficult to do on a state-owned road, but as a conceptual rendering, we went with what the village wanted to see, what they envisioned, and we figured we'd start them at that high point and then let them negotiate with DOT down to whatever is acceptable. Recommending promoting RRFBs or something similar. this lane on the north, there's not enough space to continue a sidewalk here because of this railroad bridge. It gets very narrow. So we're recommending some striping on the shoulder, give the visual appearance that the lane is more narrow than it is without a physical barrier. And then also recommended extending this sidewalk network on the north side of the road, all the way up to a main intersection, which we'll see at the next design concept. There's another small park up there that we recommended has a direct sidewalk connection. This is that next intersection where we were just looking, would have been off to the right of our screen. This is an intersection with New York State 85A, Voorheesville Avenue, which also leads to their main street further north, and then Stonington Hill Road, which is a pretty big suburban subdevelopment here. This is the existing condition. You can see the geometry of these two streets makes this intersection a little bit tricky. We examined a lot of opportunities or potential solutions to this, including like a small peanut-shaped roundabout, things of that nature. There were very limited options just given the right-of-way constraints that are at this location. So this is what we recommended. It's basically adjusting the geometry slightly to give us some more space between these two roads. So Voorheesville Avenue turns off a little bit more sharply to give it a 90-degree intersection with 85A. We've put in some don't block the box type striping because we heard from residents that traffic will get backed up and block these intersections. So even though there's more space between these roads, we also wanted to add the striping to remind people to keep these intersections open. We added a pedestrian refuge island on Stonington Hill Road here, redesigned the geometry of the crossings a little bit, and then with the park space that was lost to fix the geometry of this intersection, we added some more green space on the other side to give somewhat of a gateway treatment on the way into the core part of the village. I'll also note these small red dashes that you see here is updated signage to warn trucks and freight vehicles of the low bridge, which would be off the screen to the right. So we've also proposed redoing that signage. After that is Voorheesville Main Street. If anybody's ridden the rail trail, you're probably familiar with the trailhead, which is right up here in the top left corner of the screen at Grove Street. The main issue with South Main Street, we didn't hear a ton of complaints about safety. However, there are utility lines that run across the sidewalk here on the north side of the road. And those utility lines are frequently right in the middle of the sidewalk. So it's a major accessibility concern. There's not enough width with the utility lines the way that they are for somebody with a wheelchair to be able to navigate this street. So what we've done here is a number of things. First and foremost, the biggest change is that the village acquired this property that is shown in green here, and they are currently evaluating the condition of the building to see if it can stay up. But they are proposing turning this into a municipal parking lot. Excuse me. So there will be a municipal parking lot here. To accommodate the utility poles, we have basically extended the sidewalk out and removed some street parking spaces. So now the utility poles will be in the street parking areas. This also creates space for people to put garbage cans. These residential buildings and commercial spaces were putting their garbage cans right on the sidewalk, and that was another accessibility concern. So now there's space for the utility poles, space for mailboxes, space for garbage cans, that kind of thing, which then frees up the sidewalk space. Those parking spots that were lost to these bump outs will be covered by the municipal parking lot that is being installed. We're pushing for pedestrian scale street lighting. Currently, this road is lit with traditional Tiger style lights, the very tall highway lighting that you would see. We've added some gateway elements near the rail trail. We are pushing for the village to continue a sidewalk connection across the railroad tracks here, right to the trailhead. They've been having issues negotiating this with the railroad company, but again, what we're trying to show here is the ideal situation that the village has asked for, give them that in a conceptual rendering so that they can take it and basically negotiate down with the railroad. But part of this includes pedestrian gates at the railroad crossings, so those are drawn in as well. We also included a high visibility and raised crosswalk between the municipal parking lot and the sidewalk on this other side here. The main purpose of this is really more as speed control than it is to have a raised crossing. We don't anticipate a ton of foot traffic coming across here, but it just seemed like a more logical way to install a speed bump is to pair it with the crosswalk here instead of having those as two separate things. This ensures that cars are slowing down at the crossing. I know I skipped over some details, but just trying to get through those things pretty quickly so that we can get to the recommendations. I think this is probably the core of what people might want to talk about. We've bundled our recommendations into a couple of different categories. The first is looking at schools. So the village has acquired some property and built additional parking lots that function as overflow parking lots for the Voorheesville Elementary School at a location they call Torx Hill. And then they also entered an agreement with St. Matthew's Church, which is about a quarter mile from the elementary school, to use overflow parking lots there. Basically, we're recommending that the school speed zone be expanded to include the areas with those parking lots. We worked with our New York State DOT partners on the advisory committee for this project and found that school speed zones can actually be applied to daycare facilities and other after-school programs. And there are several daycare facilities on roads that had speeding issues, and so we are recommending that these daycare facilities be included in the school zones within the village. And then with these new parking lots that have come in around the elementary school, the way that the existing crosswalk system is set up doesn't really align with the way that people actually walk. And so we find what we've been hearing is a lot of people are basically jaywalking to find the most direct path to the school. And so we're recommending that the village basically engage in a small study to look at all of the crosswalks that serve the school and try to consolidate them to the locations that make the most sense. And then the village really wanted automated enforcement around those school speed zones, like what the city of Albany has. So recommended that they work with New York State legislators to allow them to do that. We have a series of additional plans and studies that we're recommending. This first one is largely stemming from the accessibility issues on Main Street, but work with CRTC to conduct an ADA transition plan and identify all of the accessibility barriers within the village. We heard from a lot of community members that they wanted off-road connections between their neighborhoods, and that just was outside the scope of what we were looking at in this plan. And so we're recommending that they develop a village-wide trail and connectivity plan to look for those off-road opportunities. And then this is probably the most important one, is to adopt this plan and policy once it's done. After that is just a series of other recommendations. We're really trying to hammer home this 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. So there's, on top of being in the actual policy that we've provided the village, it's a recommendation within the plan to lower the speed limits down to 25 on all village-owned roads. After that is working within this 25-mile-an-hour speed limit push is to work with DOT and Albany County to identify a core downtown area where those speeds would be appropriate on state and county-owned roads. We made several recommendations in the policy that touch on zoning and site plan review processes. So recommending that the village take those and update their zoning and site plan review to promote the complete streets policy. That's like the connectivity between new subdivisions, requiring projects to go through a connectivity plan, that kind of thing. Having them work with CDTA to improve transit service, work with the town of New Scotland to promote connectivity with some of the subdivisions that are just outside the village boundaries, work with the county sheriff to promote enforcement, and continue to collaborate with the school district, sports leagues, and other things to set up parking management plans for their events. A lot of the reason the village has been acquiring property and building these parking lots is because of like summer activity programming and things like that. And we're recommending that they get out of the habit of just buying land and building parking lots every time they have some kind of a traffic issue, and look at like drop-off programming and working with sheriffs to help them manage traffic during those events rather than building surface parking lots wherever they can. These last few things here are pretty straightforward. Just that tactical urbanism temporary demonstration recommendation that we had within the policy. We're recommending that they work with the Albany County Department of Health to go ahead and implement those things and look for some health funding to do some of this work, basically looking outside of the traditional transportation structures to promote complete streets. Continuing to collaborate with Albany County for School Road. We also have Altamont Road in this next recommendation here. These two locations were mentioned quite a bit during public engagement, but we just didn't have the capacity to do detailed conceptual designs for every road that came up during our outreach events in the village. So these are the next two priority streets that we think could use some attention, and they're both owned by Albany County. So collaborate with the county for those things. And then again, back to the parking topic is we did a quick analysis on their current parking requirements and zoning and found there are several land uses that require significantly more surface parking than square footage would be allocated to the actual business or building itself. And so we just recommended that they took a look at those, run the numbers themselves, and determine if that zoning is aligned with what they intended. Our next steps are getting that draft report revised, posted for public comment. And then finalizing those revisions, submitting all the materials to the village and closing out the project. I know I just ripped through a ton of information pretty quickly. I think I still have a couple of minutes. I did not set a timer on my phone, but I think there's still a couple of minutes for questions if anybody has them.
Great, thank you very much, Kyle. Yeah, if anyone has any quick questions, feel free to ask. Kyle, when do you anticipate this plan and policy being completed and adopted by the village?
The plan and policy will be completed by the end of this month. I don't know what the timeline is going to be for adoption. When we presented to the Village Board of Trustees, they seemed ready to adopt at that moment. So my expectation is that whatever their next meeting is following the completion of this plan, when we submit all the materials to them, their next Village Board of Trustees meeting will likely be the meeting where they adopt.
Right. All right, not seeing any questions. Thank you very much, Kyle, for presenting on this to us today. All right, give me one moment here to get my screen shared again. All right, now I'll move into our discussion items. We don't have a ton of them today, so it should be fairly quick. The first is just the update on our 2025 to 2030 tip. This is no surprises. Last meeting, I presented to you the projects that had been recommended for funding. Those projects were all selected for funding. So in total, 6 really active transportation focused projects were funded. Those can be seen on the screen along with the amounts for each one. In total, it's about $28.3 million of newly programmed projects for active transportation. The tip has been adopted and it will be it'll go live October 1st is when the new full tip will be available. Next, we have an update on our in motion plan from our executive director, Sandy Misowitz.
Thanks. Next slide. I'm gonna go very quickly through this. I think everybody knows we've been working on a regional transportation plan for the last couple of years. It's really our policy guide for how we invest in the transportation system using the federal funding in the region. This is going to replace our current plan, which is New Visions 2050. Next slide. Next slide. So primarily the goals that we've drafted so far for the plan are focused on safety, mobility, access, livability, and resilience. We've kind of narrowed this down to these 5 key points to help us in crafting some of the strategies in the plan and to be consistent with the regional vision that we've identified for the plan. Next slide. So we boiled down all of the strategies and actions being proposed in the long range plan into these what I'll call 7 focus areas: maintaining transportation infrastructure, creating a connected system of multiple transportation options, planning for a resilient system, improving the operation of the system, integrating transportation and land use planning, supporting economic development, and coordinating the many strategies from many state, regional, and local plans. Next slide. So I'm just going to give you guys the super highlights of the active transportation related strategies and actions. In this kind of maintaining infrastructure, you know, we want to maintain all infrastructure in a state of good repair, not just our roads and bridges, right? While we're doing maintenance, basic repavings, thinking about replacing bridges, we want to incorporate multimodal transportation options whenever possible. So that can range from as simple as, hey, while we're restriping a road, think about, is there room for a bike lane? Can you fix the ADA curb ramp while you're out there doing it? Some basic maintenance sorts of things. Next slide. We collect a lot of condition data, and traditionally here it's been focused on roads. But we want to expand that to include the condition of our trails and our sidewalks, because more and more things are aging in that space, and we need to have some methodology through which we can develop plans for maintaining that infrastructure as well. So we're going to be embarking on identifying some data collection activities, And then, you know, as Ethan just described with our current tip, you know, we're gonna have to reach out for more funds. We do not have enough funds in the capital region to do all the work we want to do. So exploring those discretionary grants and other alternative funding tools. It will be some additional work on our part. Next slide. This kind of focus area goes without saying, this is heavy duty on the active transportation. One of the things that we wanted to emphasize in the plan is developing an active transportation, or also known as a complete streets network. Think of this like we categorize the national highway system, and there's a map with a series of roads and they're all identified. We want to do the same thing for active transportation. And truly develop a priority network. So that we can emphasize and make sure that all of those infrastructure initiatives are interconnected. Because we have a lot of locations in the region where we may have a 2-mile stretch of a bike lane and then it stops. Or a 3-mile trail and it stops. So we want to make sure these things are interconnected, and that's the point of the network. We're gonna continue to encourage complete street policy adoption. We have a lot of communities that have done that already. We can continue to encourage that. Next slide. We've been putting a lot of work into our Vision Zero Regional Safety Action Plan, and there's gonna be a lot of recommendations that come out of that. So we want to make sure that we support investing in improving safety and emphasizing our vulnerable users, particularly our cyclists and our pedestrians. We also want to encourage the use of universal design techniques, because if you're designing for a range of users, it's going to benefit all of us. So we want to make sure we encourage use of universal design techniques when possible. So, we also want to quantify the benefits of active transportation. You know, we need to do better at emphasizing economic benefits, the public health benefits, and trying to quantify some of these things. And we're going to be looking at some tools, some of which we've already explored, to kind of fine tune this. And then this can be incorporated into how we assess projects for our TIP. Where right now we don't have these kind of metrics to utilize when we're assessing the value of a project. And also we can use this with information with decision makers, when sometimes we hear, well, rec trails are just for recreation. Well, they have a lot of other benefits too. So we want to be able to quantify those and make the case for why investing in these active transportation facilities is important. And where we have underutilized infrastructure, much like we had with the Skyway and the old ramp that the Skyway was created out of, but where we have underutilized infrastructure, where can we adapt it to include active transportation, become an active transportation facility? So we want to explore those opportunities as well. So, you know, resilience, I mean, we just saw in the state of Texas, a pretty horrible example of what can happen with extreme weather. We want to be able to identify these vulnerabilities for our entire transportation system, not just the motorized transportation system, because we recognize there are trails already that face flooding challenges at certain times of year. So we want to identify those, and we're going to be looking to prepare, you know, certainly a local road infrastructure resilience plan, but we may extend that beyond just local roads to include other sorts of infrastructure. Next slide. We're also working a lot with NYSDOT, and NYSDOT has made traffic signals a priority while we're thinking about traffic signals and improving the operation of the transportation system. We don't want to lose sight of the fact that as we're retiming signals and we're building in these other technologies, that we're thinking about the bicyclists and the pedestrian timing phases, because these are complicated systems, but we want to make sure that we're integrating all of the modes when we're thinking about how we're expanding and adding technologies to our signal system. And that's kind of ties into the development of our what we're hoping will be the next generation of our transportation demand management program. Transportation demand management is a series of initiatives that help shift users from single occupancy vehicles to other modes. And it's also an opportunity to, particularly in congested corridors, encourage use of other modes. So what does that program look like? How does active transportation fit in? That's one of the additional items we'll be exploring. Next slide. In terms of the integrating of land use and transportation planning, I mean, clearly we're continuing to support the community zoning codes and comprehensive plans that encourage walkable communities and compact development. We also want to make sure, we talked a lot about housing affordability in the capital region. And we want to make sure that we're connecting transportation with housing through planning. There's no greater interrelationship to how people move around and how we're building our residential areas. So these two initiatives in combination, working together, can help shift mode to other active transportation options, while maintaining other, limiting our congestion corridors and providing numerous other benefits. Next slide. We also, along with the affordability of housing, affordable transportation options is of increasing concern, and truthfully, nothing's more affordable than being able to walk and bike. So again, another consideration for implementing more active transportation options. And as CDTA and other entities get more and more into mobility hubs and sort of these intermodal facilities, we want to make sure that we're planning for that first and last mile of transportation. And we're thinking about if there's a bike share stand, or is there enough supportive infrastructure around the bike share stand to be, something that the average person would use. And what other tools need to be implemented to support active transportation in these areas. And the final grouping is, again, there are so many plans now, many of which were required under the infrastructure law at the federal level. State DOT, if you don't already know, just released their draft statewide transportation master plan for public review. Talks a lot about active transportation. CDTA is a big supporter of active transportation, given that their riders are accessing their system, usually by walking or biking. And then, us as the MPO have a range of plans. And we want to make sure that all of these plans are interconnected, integrated in whatever way possible. They're all going to be included in the long range plan by reference. But we want to make sure that all of these strategies are kept to the forefront as we move through additional planning work in the capital region. And then in terms of, one of the things that we're doing with this long range plan, which is a little different, we've always traditionally had a policy-based plan here, but this time around, we're going to include a handful of priority projects in our financial plan. And not only are we including everything that's in the upcoming TIP, the 2025-2030 TIP, there's several bridge projects, all of which offer opportunities to expand active transportation, as many of these will likely lead us towards bridge replacements. And then we have some CDTA related initiatives, but the two highlighted in yellow, implementation of the regional trails plan, and specifically the Zim Smith Trail. We highlighted the Zim Smith Trail as that's one trail project that exceeds $10 million for construction. And we want to make sure it's noted specifically in this plan because it is a priority for Saratoga County. That's not to say that the other trails in the regional trails plan are not important, but it's just at a place where to get the attention of the big grants, we need to have it specifically called out there. And next slide. So next steps, the strategy survey is open, so we're seeking. Obviously, I didn't show all of the strategies being proposed in the plan. But this survey link, actually, I'm going to be sending out an email to all the meeting participants today. All of our advisory committees will get the meeting link, the survey link today. The survey will be open throughout the month of July. We're finalizing our financial plan, and through the year 2050, we estimate based on that table I just showed you, and some other variables that there may be as much as $1 billion over the lifespan of the plan available for quote other things. So that doesn't mean that there's going to be $1 billion sitting there all at once, But over the lifespan of the plan, there is some funding available for initiatives not specifically called out in our regional plan. We're also working on now finalizing our performance measures, so we have federally required ones that we have to do, but we also want to identify some regionally impactful ones and ones that will be beneficial to communities in terms of measurements. And we're anticipating a full draft plan document to be available by our August planning committee meeting. We'll open it for public review at that point for 25 days with plan adoption in September. I think the last slide is just simply some engagement that we'll be doing in the community in the region over this next couple of weeks. We'll be at a couple of the farmers markets, the city of Schenectady's Green Market, up in Saratoga at the farmers market, over in the city of Rensselaer. We're also gonna be holding an open house once that public review period opens, at the Albany Public Library's Delaware branch. We'll be scheduling a virtual workshop as well, and we're seeking other opportunities for public engagement. So if there's a group you would like us to speak to, or an event you think would be worthwhile for us to attend, we'd be happy to hear from you. And I think that wraps me up.
Great, thanks, Sandy. We got one comment in there from Scott Miller at Saratoga Plan. He just said it would be good to call out the Hudson Mohawk Trail to Zim Smith Connector M on the regional trail plan as a specific project, since it falls under the 10-year funding outlook, probably $10 to $15 million in 2024 dollars. So comment from him.
Okay, I'm gonna need more specifics of what trail he's referring to, so.
Yeah, we can talk about
Okay.
it offline. All right, so the 2025 trail count program, our next quick discussion item. We're currently soliciting sites. We can only do it on multi-use paths, side paths. If you have a sidewalk that, you know, has a utility strip that's buffered from the street, we can maybe work with you on that, but it typically works best on multi-use paths. We have 3 counters available, and we like to do a couple counts at the same time. So if you have one area you'd like counted near you, maybe try and think of a couple others, and we can get a couple counts going. We typically count for 2 to 3 weeks, which we then have formulas that can provide year-long estimates for traffic on these trails. This program is free for all our municipal partners, so reach out to me if you have any trails you'd like counted. For any non-municipal entities, you know, still reach out to me. Can't guarantee that we'll be able to count it, but say we get a request for one count in an area, and then we have you know, you request a count that's in a similar area, we can probably tag it on. So just reach out to me at both municipal partners and any non-municipal entities. Just send me directly an email, and I'll work with you to get those counts going. So like I said, we're soliciting sites now, so reach out whenever something pops up for you. Then we'll quickly go through the status of our planning initiatives that we have ongoing. You've seen most of these before, and most of them are still in progress. We just had the update on our Village of Voorheesville Safe Streets Plan policy, with the estimated completion being this month, and then adoption soon. The Broadway multimodal resilient study is ongoing. Public comment is currently being accepted on the final draft plan. That closes at the end of this week. So if you have any final comments, please get them in. That plan is expected to be adopted this August. Central Ave West corridor study. The draft report was just shared with the town and DOT for their feedback on the designs. And it's going to be shared with the study advisory committee before their next meeting, also anticipated completion in August. The County Route 109 study in the town of Half Moon is just getting going. They have a project kickoff meeting in May, and the first SAC meeting is coming up this month. Route 7 corridor study, the first public survey just closed in June. So right now the feedback from that study is being reviewed, and then they are going to begin coming up with recommendation concepts. Our 2 new projects, or 2 new linkage studies for this year, are still getting off the way. The Transportation Council recently welcomed Martin Hull onto our staff. He has a wealth of experience and will be leading those 2 projects. So hopefully those will be getting going before too much longer. Our Tech Assist program, we have our 3 first primary Tech Assists that are being led by Andrew Tracy. The US Route 4 and Blooming Road Drive at North Greenbush and Broadway Partition Street in City of Rensselaer projects are pretty close to the end. They have some recommendations that have been shared with the sponsors of those Tech Assists, and they're really just being wrapped up right now. The town of Ballston Tech Assist finished up in June, was shared with the town. Cohoes parking study is currently drafting recommendations, so that won't be too much longer, anticipated completion in August. And then the large active transportation tech assist that is beginning with Albany County is just going finishing up the contract phase right now. The request for expressions of interest will likely be released before too much longer, and then that one will be on as well. For our larger projects, just had the update from Sandy about the long range plan. Like she shared, there is a survey that is live and will remain live through the end of July. So please review all the plans and strategies and give us any feedback you have. The 378 bridge over the Hudson River Pell study being led by DOT is still ongoing. They just recently had a public meeting in June, and they are, still finishing up their concepts and recommendations. Our last couple items, ADA self-evaluation and transition plans in the region. Town of Wilton and Albany County currently have 2 ongoing. The town of Wilton's just had comments closed on July 3rd, so that one shouldn't be too much longer. And then the Albany County ADA transition plan contract is still under development and hopefully will be finished up this month, and then that plan can begin. The Reimagine 787 is hopefully nearing completion. The project team is currently working through the well comments they received, and they are hoping to have the final report completed sometime this year. So that's very exciting for everyone. Vision Zero Safety Action Plan still ongoing. We're currently beginning a municipal review of the safety investigations that were conducted, and draft project recommendations are available right now, I believe, on the website for the project. Finally, the 890 Exit 4C Pell study in Schenectady just held their second information session a week or 2 ago at SUNY Schenectady, and so they are still updating their concepts based on the feedback they received. For all these projects, if you have any information, feel free to reach out to us here at the Transportation Council. For the projects that we don't run, we'll connect you with someone, or all of the projects that are ongoing do have project websites, which are on these slides, and these slides we shared after the meeting. So that is all our discussion items. So now we can move on to participant updates. So this is just for anyone in person or virtual. If you have any updates about recent wins, recent challenges, events upcoming, now would be a great time to share them. So I'll just open up the floor. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share?
I do have one thing.
Yeah.
It's not local, but just so you know, it's coming. Our friends at the federal government have implemented, I'll say promoted, a program called Safe Arterials for Everyone, SAFE, through reliable operations and distraction reducing strategy, roads, safe roads. This initiative is targeting non-freeway arterials. RMPO is going to be working with state DOT to identify eligible corridors for this program in our region. We have 60 days to provide Federal Highway Administration with a list. I'm just going to read verbatim what the press release says, and you can interpret it how you would like. Intersections and crosswalks need to be kept free of distractions, including artwork, all political messages, signs, or any other roadside distractions. This may also include panhandlers. This is an interesting way of expressing this information. We have yet to find, this is brand new, so we have yet to see what that means in reality. I think it's safe to say, no pun intended, if there are remaining segments on our arterial system that still have creative crosswalks, that is exactly what they want to get rid of. Any words painted on streets, they want to get rid of them. So, you're using safety as a means to accomplish this. But it'll be interesting to see how this actually gets implemented. They are saying in the call that the segments are supposed to have the highest safety, operational, and compliance concerns. So I'll let you interpret what that means in reality, but this is where we're headed. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Sandy. All right, not seeing any,
I have
anyone on.
one. Sorry
Oh, yeah,
to
Erica,
to jump
go
in.
ahead.
This is Erica from Parks and Trails, New York. I just wanted to let everyone know that registration is open for the 2025 Greenways Conference that we'll be hosting in Kingston. So not too far from the capital region. We'd love to see you all there. We have announced our keynotes. They will be Ryan Chow, the president of the Rails to Trails Conservancy, and Jeanette Steek-Kahn, the former New York City DOT commissioner. So that's just the start. We're going to have an awesome program. We're working on developing some of the details, so stay tuned on the rest of the agenda, but would love to see you all there.
Great, thank you very much, Erica.
Ethan,
Anyone else? Yeah, James, go ahead.
yeah, hey, everybody, James Rath from Capital Suites here. I just wanted to let folks know that we're pursuing safer funding for the trail feasibility study that we're calling the Campus Connections. Connecting basically New Albany to RPI and some of the existing infrastructure in between and some of the infrastructure that we've talked about for a long time, including the Riverfront Trail on the Rensselaer side. So I know we've already talked to some folks who are on this meeting about this and really appreciate the support, but I know there are some other folks who are on this who probably haven't heard about this effort, and I just want to let everybody know. And if anybody has any interest or questions or comments, you can feel free to reach out to me, James@capitalstreets.org. I'll drop my email in the chat.
Awesome, thanks, James. All right, anyone else? Going once, going twice. All right. Last, other news and updates. Funny, Erica provided her update because our update that we have available is also for the Greenways Conference. So like Eric said, October 15th to 17th in Kingston. The link is here and Erica provided it in the chat. So check it out if you are interested in attending that conference. Final thing, just upcoming meetings. Our only remaining meeting scheduled for this year is October 14th, 2025. We might need to move the time for these meetings. These meetings have historically been on the second Tuesday of every third month at 9 a.m. Due to just some staffing and other meetings here internal to the Transportation Council that now kind of backs up against some other meetings and other staff time. So these meetings may potentially move to Wednesdays at 9:30. Right now, the October meeting is still scheduled for that 9 a.m. on Tuesday time. But given, like I said, that those conflicts here at the Transportation Council and also the proximity, that's wedged right in between Indigenous Peoples / Columbus Day and the Greenways Conference. So that meeting may need to be moved, out a week due to that, but you'll get plenty of notice for any meeting changes, both to that specific meeting and to our meeting schedule at large. After the October meeting, we'll schedule the meetings for 2026 and you'll all get notices of those once they've been scheduled. So that is all we have today. I want to thank everyone for attending and I will see you hopefully all in October. Thank you very much.